Y'all ready? Hi, I'm Aubrey, and this is gonna be Tech Talk with Aubrey. Tech Talk, not TikTok. Where I just discuss the technical side of motorsport, and more specifically Formula One. This is from my own research and knowledge. I'm not an expert. I'm not studying engineering yet. Applying to schools right now. A little stressful. But today, this is a good starter, something I've written a couple papers about, so I feel like I can knowledgeably, speak on it. We're going to talk about the plague of last year's season, porpoising. So, I'm getting text right now. I have my little agenda I'm going to pull up here. Oh my goodness, this is taking so long, guys. Hello. Okay, I'm hoping this stays. This is balancing on my knees right now because I'm on my screened-in porch. Here we go. Oh my goodness. Okay, stay, please. So, yeah, I think we've settled the name on Tech Talk with Aubrey because I'm Aubrey. Hi, I'm 17. I'm a big F1 fan. Trying to get into other motorsports too. I've been watching some IndyCar stuff, watching some, feeder series stuff. So today we're going to talk about porpoising and floor design. So for those of you that don't know, porpoising was a big epidemic last year, specifically for Mercedes. Ferrari had a little bit of it. Red Bull had it and then fixed it in a day, because they're insane. But sorry. Let's just talk about why it occurred, and it was essentially the cars going bouncing a ton. And it caused headaches, gave Lewis Hamilton really bad back pain. It's all around a huge problem, especially if you're a driver trying to focus because you're driving 300 kilometers per hour, however much it is, and you're that's gonna it will happen a little because you are driving 300 kilometers an hour, but it shouldn't be how it was, and we're gonna discuss why it was how it was. I don't know. So pull up my notes here. Ground effect cars were kind of that's what. Okay, so the reason, so if you didn't know, 2022 season had new car regulations, so it was brand new cars, starting from scratch. No one really knew what was going to happen, and these cars were effectively what we call ground effect cars. So that meant that they're closer, if you look at the difference between the 2021 cars and how close they ran to the ground versus the 2022 cars, it's a noticeable difference. And so ground effect cars have been in F1 for years, but they were banned. They originally came about in the 70s with Lotus, an old Formula One team, if you don't know. Kimi Räikkönen used to drive for them in the 2000s, obviously not in the 70s. But the head of Lotus kind of had their own Adrian Newey back then, for comparison. His name was Colin Chapman. He was more of the director of everything, and he didn't really invent it himself, from what I understand. He was more a Christian Horner type, but also he kind of was the name behind this ground effect being used. Anyway, so these cars, I think it's 78 when ground effect became enough of a thing in these cars that Colin Chapman, the head of Lotus or whatever, decided to profit off of it. So, oh my gosh, sorry. Hold on, I have a quote from Wikipedia here. Guys, don't dish on Wikipedia for your sources. Anyway, so this guy named Sean Buckley, who was working at UC Berkeley at the time. I don't know if he was a student, professor, like graduate student. I'm assuming he was some form of PhD, graduate student, professor, some kind, guest. But he was at UC Berkeley at the time and was like told, hey, you should work on Undercar Aerodynamics by Colin Chapman. And okay, Chapman was the founder of Lotus, so more of a Christian Horner than Adrian Newey. So Buckley had, according to Wikipedia, Buckley has had experience with car design, but this was an Indy car. He designed apparently the first high wing used in an Indy car, which was Jerry Izert's Bat car, which ran in the 1966 Indy 500. So basically, this Buckley guy was like somehow knew Colin Chapman, and Chapman was like, hey, like work on this undercar aerodynamics thing, like that's going to give us a big edge. And it did, because these were ground effect cars, which means much closer to the ground, which means the floor shape, direction, however you want to call it, affects it a lot more. So, and Lotus was not the only team that used ground effect to their advantage. Brabham and McLaren like also kind of used it, but Lotus was the main one, and the main one we're going to talk about. So 1978 was the year kind of everyone was like, okay, this is happening. Like, this is when it kind of came to fruition. So Lotus put their car so low to the ground, utilized ground effect and like the little regulations they had at the time, because this was the 70s, and also designed this skirt. That's what it was called. It's not a typical skirt. It was basically like, if this was the car, right? Like the car, like if this was the floor, it's like it's this close to the ground, and then with the skirt it kind of went like that along the edges, and so it created even more suction and more downforce, which made it faster. But it got a little too fast, and it got a little too dangerous, because the rest of the capabilities of the cars were not up to that same level of safety, and so it was like too much, and the FIA banned it. And the skirt and other they didn't really have any ground effect regulations for years until 2022 because of this. So when we get to 2022, the only information they really have about ground effect cars is from other series and from the 70s. So not the greatest. So essentially, now that the capabilities and safety features of the cars have caught up, they're like, okay, let's bring ground effect back. Like, let's make it possible for cars to run even lower. And so ground effect... So what happened in 2022 is that the bottom of the cars became a wing, essentially, instead of just like a floor. Like, we still call it the floor, but it's a wing. It's like an airplane wing. Like kind of an upside down airplane wing, if you like, the, you know, front wing or the rear wing. Like, it's another aerodynamic part. It's not a separate like floor. It's complicated. It'll make sense in a second. But the vortex of downforce was too powerful. So when you have your car going along the straight, which is when this would occur the most, the downforce, because of designing the bottom of the floor like a wing and making it a wing, it acts like a wing. So the air, it like moves the air under it, and the air will suck it down. But it was so powerful that when it sucked it down too far, and the cars were way too close to the ground, that it would hit the ground. So like, it's going along, it's getting sucked, boom. And when it hit the ground, it would break that downforce suction and zoom right back up. But the suspension would catch it from, like, you know, going off completely. So it brings it back into that range, and then it gets sucked down again. So it's kind of like a wave, which is where we saw the heads of the drivers. So that brings us to why it affected Mercedes so much worse than everyone else. And as we know, Mercedes tried their little no side pods approach, which would have been great if they had realized, like, a different way to, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but because they didn't have side pods, that side pods are an aerodynamic feature of the car, and they help redirect the air, because it's an aerodynamic feature. That's what aerodynamic features do. They help redirect the air. Because it helped redirect the air, without them, it means a lot more downforce and air being applied under and over the car, which does, yes, make it go faster if you didn't have the porpoising problem. So more air was being pulled under and over the car, which means the suction was even more powerful than any other team, which means that the porpoising was worse, because instead of being like, ooh, it was a much stronger suction, so it was a much more hard porpoising. I don't know how to explain it, but like, you know what I mean? Like, it was so much worse because the lack of side pods means that more air was affecting the downforce in terms of like under and over the car's wings. Now, as we know, Red Bull and Adrian Newey are crazy insane and good and fixed it. And I'm going to pull up in editing a picture of like a drawing of their floor from 2022. So basically they realized that like the floor is a wing even more than they originally thought, and so they designed channels in it that like redirected the airflow in a way that you get the maximum downforce, which you want, but you also, you get the optimal downforce, but you're not so much suction that you're porpoising all the time. Like, it's going to happen a little no matter what you do. Like, you're not going to sacrifice everything to, stop porpoising, but it's happening no matter what. So I'm going to read a quote here from this article on F1's website that I highly recommend checking out. It's part of their Tech Tuesday series. Very useful. I read them all the time. It's free. You just got to like sign up for F1 Unlocked. Like, they'll just send you emails that you can like put in your spam folder. But I find them really interesting. The articles are good. It's the same two guys. And they make it like pretty easy to understand, and there's always drawings with it to like help you see what parts of the car they're talking about. So this is a quote about the Red Bull underfloor. The keel in the Red Bull underfloor is less pear-shaped than other cars, with specific contouring. I'll pull up the picture that they're referring to here. And 1, 2, and 3. That's the part of the picture. It would appear the Red Bull tunnels are therefore allowing for greater variability in pressure as the ride height falls and rises according to the car's speed. The inlet vanes also vary in geometry along their length, suggesting they are carefully matched with the tunnel roof to equalize the pressure in the forward part of the tunnel. The ice skate feature 4 is a metal underfloor wing. So, as I was saying, they essentially created these inlets and created these lanes to direct the air so that they get their optimal downforce or whatever they want and optimal speed, keep them the car as close to the ground as they can, while also like not having it be so powerful that they're like causing major headaches with their drivers. So that's kind of the gist of it. To go more deeply into it, this is another quote about the cause of porpoising in terms of like the downforce. This is by Sam Collins, who's like an F1 presenter or something. This was from a YouTube video where they kind of explain the basics of porpoising. But he said, the whole underfloor of the cars has been essentially turned into a wing, and that sort of sucks the whole bottom of the cars right down to the road. And he called this like a vortex like effect, which I think is a really good way of explaining it. It's almost like a vacuum. You know how if you run your vacuum over carpet, like, and you kind of pull it up, sometimes the carpet will stick with it and kind of suck up a little and then let go. Just flip that upside down in your mind. That's exactly what's happening with the floors of the cars, or was happening. So I found that visualization really good. So another question to be addressed is like, why not just raise the floor height and like make it so that you still get your downforce, but it doesn't suck it all the way down? Which, like, yes, but then your cars are a lot slower. Or, well, a lot in Formula 1 terms. It might be like a tenth or so, but that can cost you a bunch. So that's like a last resort. And that's why everyone was upset at Mercedes, because they kept wanting to raise the minimum ride height. And eventually, at the end of the season, the FIA was like, okay, minimum ride height is like 15 millimeters or something. Which I don't even know. I don't think the 2022 season there was a minimum ride height. So Mercedes kind of pushed for it a little, but that's why Christian Horner was so upset in that one Drive to Survive clip. Because by like having a minimum ride height raised, that means that like his car is going to be slower. Everyone's car is going to be slower. And while I would love for the Red Bull to be slower, I love Max, guys. I love Max. I just feel like it's kind of a boring season. Like, if it was, I don't know. I'm not going to speak on that anymore. But raising the ride height, just, it's kind of a, I don't want to say stupid solution, but it's like the easiest one. And I really like how Red Bull and Adrian Newey came up with a much more creative one that still manages to keep the really low ride height, while also, like, you know, I feel like doing cool things with aerodynamics like that, I don't know, I like that better than just the simple raise the ride height answer. Like, I don't care if it makes the car slower. Like, do what you gotta do. But I feel like the invention and the thought process behind changing the way the wing floor works is a lot cooler and shows a lot more like development and thought process behind developing your car than raising the ride height might. But what do I know? You know, I'm not even in college yet. Like, I can't even study engineering yet. More on the ride height. As I said, the FIA set a minimum ride height of, 15 millimeters for this, anything past the 2022 season. Who knows if they'll change it. But basically, they created an equation that analyzes the porpoising. I don't even want to try and explain what it looks like. I'm gonna pop it up on screen. It is insane. Yeah, it's a crazy equation. But if they use that to analyze the porpoising level, and if it gets to an unsafe level, they force the team to fix it in terms of like raising the ride height until they can get it back under control. And that's like team basis, I believe. That's not like the entire grid has to raise it. So I kind of like that solution, surprisingly, because it kind of forces the teams to think about, okay, we gotta really try an innovative solution and not like just raise the ride height, because it's not like everyone's ride height is getting raised. It's just them. So that kind of defeats like what Toto was kind of pushing for. And I think, but you still get what he was pushing for. I think it's a good solution, honestly, because it makes the team think about their aerodynamic decisions. And I think that's a really cool part of F1 that, like, we should explore more. Like, I want to hear more about it. It sounds, you kind of have to dig for info on it, and you kind of have to, like, I don't know. I find it really interesting. Yeah, and porpoising has definitely improved. If you look at clips from like the beginning of the season last year to even the end of the season, and like right now especially, porpoising, like it's hard to notice it now. Like we notice it a lot more because we're actively looking for it because it was such a huge deal last year. But yeah, I think it's definitely gotten a lot better. Yeah, so as that equation, they call it the aerodynamic oscillation metric. And this is the FIA's definition of it. The external accelerometer defined in Article 8.10.2 of the Technical Regulations, which lies close the center of gravity, the center of gravity of the car will be used to measure vertical acceleration. We will be separately asking for the teams to provide CAD of the installation of that sensor as well as the part number used. Its signal some long ass variable that I'm going to put on the screen will be used to calculate the metric, which is the AOM. Which is a representation of the energy associated with the instances of large vertical acceleration and is expressed in J /kilogram /100 kilometers with the following equation, giant ass equation, where AOM is the metric in that 1 unit of J's, kilograms, 100 kilometers, so that's a unit apparently. Guys, I should not be taking calculus next year. D sub AOM is the total length of the sections of the track used for this calculations in kilometers. That's normally triangle subset T. I know that symbol from physics. I know what it means and I'm blanking. Guys, I promise I know what I'm talking about. Is the sample time of the signal in S, which I assume is seconds. And that weird long ass variable is the vertical acceleration of the car measured by the accelerometer in G. Rect sub 3G is a function such as rect sub 3G x equals... Yeah, I'm just putting that all up on screen. You'll know what I mean. But it's really, I don't know. It's cool to see all this math for me. Some people don't like math. I feel you. I find it interesting in terms of its applications in things like F1. But while we're talking about floor design, let's just, I want to know, like, what y'all think of porpoising and, like, was this FIA's decision a good one? Like, I don't know. I feel like they kind of hit it on the mark for once. Like, the FIA gets a lot of shit for some of their decisions, but I feel like this one was not that bad. Like, they kind of, like, I don't know. Obviously could have been better, but, like, I don't really know what else they could have done. They're ensuring the safety of the drivers. Like, if it gets too much, like, they'll calculate it using that equation. They're like, hey, like, this is bad. And I guess they only use that calculation if it's, like, a noticeable complaint that drivers and teams are having. Like, I don't know. I haven't really seen it become a problem this year. I've been really out of order this whole time. It's only been like 25 minutes. Like, this is a short episode. Like, I see people talk for a lot longer, but I don't know. I feel like I feel like Red Bull, for all the shit they get because they're Red Bull, they've got it locked down. Like, I will say, they do know how to build a good car. And Mercedes did because, like, I feel like these new regulations have made aerodynamics a much bigger deal than perhaps the engine is. Because as we saw from the multiple times when there's been, like, an aerodynamic issue with one of the Red Bull cars, like, in that sprint race in Spa. Yeah, the sprint race in Spa, when Checo and Lewis collided, and Checo, like, immediately dropped a bunch of places. That was just because he had, like, a hole in his side pod, which, like, yeah, that's a big deal. But that just shows you how important those aerodynamic features are. And I think Croft even said something like that on the broadcast. And that just, like, emphasizes my point. I feel like the engines have become less of a deal, and it's more the aerodynamics. Because, I mean, obviously, they're not the exact same engines because they're from the same manufacturer. Like, the AlphaTauri is miles behind the Red Bull, but it is the same engine. And so you gotta think, what is the main difference between those two teams? One, it's the money. Two, it's the fact that Red Bull have a genius aerodynamicist. Aerodynamic person in Adrian Newey and his whole team, and a bunch of other people who are probably not named. And they design these crazy, like, you see the pictures of the floor, like the Red Bull floor compared to the Williams floor from when Checo crashed it in Monaco, and, the crane lifted it up and we got to see the floor. Like, I don't know, I feel like Mercedes got it right when it was a lot more about the engine, in that first, like, turbo hybrid era, and from, like, 2016 kind of onward, and even before then, like 2014. I feel like that was a bit more engine based, but, like, I don't know. I only really started watching in 2021. I don't know, fully that much about that era, but I feel like it's a lot more aerodynamic based now, which is exciting for me, but I can see why other people are very bored with Red Bull's dominance. And I think the reason Red Bull's dominance is so big is because it's aerodynamics. Like, if it was just engines, I don't know, all the engines are gonna be similar. Like, you see teams that have the same engine manufacturer, they're not always right next to each other. Like, you don't see, Haas and Ferrari in the same grid spots every other weekend. No. And, like, that's never been the case, but I don't know. I feel like they're allowing the allowance for closer regulations closer racing with these new regulations has opened up the door for Adrian Newey to do his thing. And I think Ferrari should poach Adrian Newey. Offer him an egregious sum of money for my mental well-being. Please. Okay? I don't know. That's just my 2 cents. Don't trust me completely. But yeah. That's short. I don't know. I feel like I talk too fast, but then I ramble a lot. So, yeah. Have a nice day, y'all. Next episode, I'm going to get my dad on and talk about G-Force, because he's a bit of an expert. I'll tell you why later.